Hello, and welcome to the Puffin Virtually Live. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Alistair, and it's my privilege to host today's event. We've got the globally best-selling author, Jeff Kinney, who's going to tell us all about his latest book, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Third Wheel. Currently the best-selling book in the UK, and if not the world. He's also going to talk to us about how he draws his characters. We're talking from Sadler's Wells Theatre in London, and we've been joined by lots of pupils from local schools. Everybody say hello to everybody watching. And of course, yourselves online, the viewers from across the globe, a big warm welcome to you all for watching out there. Now, I'm going to hand over to Jeff in just a moment, but I wanted to remind you that you can send in your questions for Jeff throughout the course of the event via the Puffin Virtually Live website. You should be able to see the address just there. And Jeff will aim to answer as many of the questions as possible in the times that we have towards the end of the event. But without further ado, please give a very big welcome to Jeff Kinney.
Thank you.
No worries.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing today? Good. Thanks so much for coming out here. It's a great honor to be back in the UK and to be speaking to the school children who have embraced my books. Thank you so much for being fans of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And thanks to everyone who's watching from classrooms. It's a great privilege to be talking to you as well. So I can't wait to tell you about my life as an author and the story of how Diary of a Wimpy Kid came to be. Are you ready to hear it? Cool. So I actually became a children's author quite by accident. And my story, I think, is kind of interesting. And I'm hoping it can serve as an inspiration to you guys. I'm sure there are some people in the audience here or on the web that are going to be the next writers or artists of the next generation. So I wanted to tell you about the beginnings of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I actually wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. And when I was a kid, I read the Washington Post. I grew up in Washington, D.C. And there were three comics that I really loved. One was The Far Side by Gary Larson. Another was Burke Breathitt's Bloom County. I really liked that one as well. But my favorite, I think, growing up was Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Watterson. How many of you guys have heard of Calvin and Hobbes? Yeah, a good number from the audience. Well, it's a classic comic, and it hasn't. A new comic, a new Calvin and Hobbes hasn't been written for 20-some years, but it's really an enduring cartoon. So it's really neat. I like to think that cartoons can really stick around and stand the test of time. So I went to college. I went to Villanova University to start in Pennsylvania, and I started with a cartoon called Doof, and I'm going to show you what my Doof character looked like. He was an awkward-looking freshman, a college freshman, and he had bug eyes and a big nose and big lips, and he was kind of strange-looking. He was very short, but he also had three little hairs on his head, right? He was nearly bald. And for some reason in cartooning, there's a long history of cartoon characters who are bald or nearly bald and are boys. In fact, the very first cartoon character who came out in, I think, 1892 was called the Yellow Kid, and he was bald. And I think the most famous nearly bald cartoon character is Charlie Brown. How many of you guys have heard of Charlie Brown from Peanuts? So Doof, I wanted to make him nearly bald so that he stood out from the rest of the characters. And when I went from Villanova University, I transferred to the University of Maryland. I took Doof with me. So you can see that when Doof traveled, he changed a lot. And you can see that he still looks about the same, but his nose is bigger, his lips are bigger, his eyes are a little bigger, and his ear is bigger, but his three hairs remain. And so you can see he's a very strange-looking character, but when he drew himself with perfect proportions, right? He drew a perfectly round head and a perfect nose and a perfectly shaped ear. And can you guess what he looked like? Well, he looked a lot like Greg Heffley. So you can see in the first frame here, Doof has drawn himself, and he looks just like Greg Heffley. So Greg Heffley, in this form, has really been around for more than 20 years. So as I was growing up, as I was going to college, actually, a new comic strip appeared in the Washington Post called Big Nate. How many of you guys have heard of Big Nate? Good number, yeah? It's written by a cartoonist named Lincoln Peirce. I'm going to show you a Big Nate cartoon right here. So Big Nate, I loved it as soon as I saw it. It just had a really good look to it, and I really liked the writing as well. So what I did was I really wanted to be a cartoonist myself. I wanted to be a real professional cartoonist, but I knew I needed advice to get to the next level. So I wrote to Lincoln Peirce. I wrote a letter. How many of you guys have even ever written a letter? You've written a real live letter? That's cool. So we used to write letters, to people who we admired. And so here was one of the letters I got back from Lincoln Peirce. So you can see what he was doing was he was saying, you know what, you're a pretty good cartoonist, but there's a lot of things you could be doing better. So here's a letter he wrote to me that showed me how to get some better spacing around my word bubbles, right? So I was cramping my writing too much. So he gave me some really good advice. And we developed this kind of pen-pal relationship, which was really cool. And after a while, after about 3 years of this, one day my younger brother, Patrick, he called me. He said, Jeff, you've got to look at today's Washington Post. Look at the comic section and look at Big Nate. And so I did, and I didn't really know what I was looking for exactly. But I looked at the comic, and I looked very closely, and finally I saw it. What he had done, what Lincoln Peirce had done, is he had drawn Doof, my character, on a little tiny sticker sheet that Big Nate was holding. So you can see he drew Doof along two other very famous cartoons, Bart Simpson and Garfield, right? And to me, this was like the biggest moment in my life. I know it was only like a little tiny centimeter on the page, but to me, this was proof that I needed to become a cartoonist because I was like, I'm a published cartoonist in the Washington Post. I'm a real cartoonist now. And so I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I kept up my cartooning in college. And in fact, I started to get some attention for my work, which was very cool. And the Washington Post did this big article on me. There's something called the style section, which is kind of like a life section, entertainment section in the paper. And it was on this one day, it was all about me. And there's a 22-year-old version of myself. I'm 41 now, but I was 22 then. And the Washington Post said that Doof was going to take on the real world and that my comic was going to be this big success. Well, I was really ready to go out into the world after college and to have this great career in cartooning. But from the time this picture was taken, it took another 14 years before I had anything else published at all. So the time in between was very difficult for me. I got lots of these. This is a rejection letter, right? And it's very impersonal. You know, I would work and then put together a submission packet and send it to a cartoon syndicate, and then I'd get back one of these, or many of these. And for anybody here that hopes to one day become a writer, I think you can expect to get rejected a lot before you have success. But I wanted to encourage you not to give up. I almost did give up. In fact, I did give up my dream of becoming a newspaper cartoonist. What happened was, after about 3 years of working on submission packets and getting rejected, I realized that I didn't actually have what it took to become a professional cartoonist. I just couldn't draw like a pro, right? I said, you know what, my skill level sort of maxes out around an 11 or 12-year-old's skill level. I said, so what can I do with this? I know I want to become a cartoonist. I know I'm a pretty good writer, but I'm not a very good artist. So what can I do with this? And a light bulb went off over my head. I said, I know what I can do with this. I can pretend to be an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old and write a journal and become a cartoonist that way. So that's where the idea for Diary of a Wimpy Kid came from. I said, I'm going to write as this character, Greg Heffley, who was really born of Doof, right? So I said, I'm going to sneak my cartoons into books. That's how I'm going to do it. And so what happened was I got this blank sketchbook. I said, I'm going to fill up this sketchbook with ideas, and then I'll start writing my book. And so I'm going to show you the first page of that sketchbook. So here's the very first page of my then blank sketchbook. And you can see some of the characters are coming to life here. You can see Rowley on the upper left-hand side. Somewhere in the middle left is Greg. And we have Nasty Pants, who's a villain in the 6th Wimpy Kid book. He makes an appearance on this very first idea page that I wrote. And at first, things were going really well. I said, you know, I could write about 3 or 4 of these a night, and I'll be done with my idea book in about a month. right? So I said, this won't take that long, and then I'll be writing. So I was very excited. But what happened was I started writing smaller and smaller. I started cramming more and more ideas onto my idea page. And I think what was happening was I was really afraid of getting to the end too quickly, and then I wouldn't have enough good ideas to write a real book. But soon it got a little bit crazy. You can see I started writing really small, and by the very end, that was my last idea page right here. And I was writing so small that today, at 41, I wouldn't be able to read what I wrote back then, a good while ago. So this one idea page actually represents about 500 printed pages of Wimpy Kid books. So I really had much too much by way of ideas. But I'm really glad I put in that work because I've been able to write, so far, 7 Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. The types of stories or the types of ideas I was putting into my idea books were stories from my childhood. I had a really average, sort of ordinary American childhood. And what I wanted to do was capture all of the funny parts in one place and to use my imagination and to add some more funny stories. So one of the funny stories, one of the things that happened to me as a kid, it's actually a little bit sad. Maybe you'll find it funny, but to me it was a little bit sad. I used to be on the swim team, and every morning I had to go to the pool, and I'd be very cold in the water, and I said, you know what? I'd rather be hiding out in the locker room from my coach than be in the water, freezing to death. So this is me, in about 1977, I would say, freezing in the locker room. And we wore these tiny little bathing suits called Speedos. I hope you guys don't have to wear those these days, but this was my childhood right there. And I see somebody flipping through the red book because I think the idea, actually it's in the blue book. So a lot of these stories made their way into my books. And in fact, I would get so cold in there that I had to do what I had to do to keep warm. So this is me, as a kid, wrapped in toilet paper. And I think that's really where the Wimpy Kid, Greg Heffley, was born. So some of the stories that have made their way into my books are things that happened to me a little bit later in my teen years that I had forgotten about, but then only after I wrote about them did I remember they happened to me. And here's a picture I found in my garage only last year. Now this picture deserves some explanation. It's a picture of surprise. This is somebody who looks very, very surprised. This is a friend of mine. Her mother, back in high school, when she was in high school, the friend, her mother accidentally took a picture of herself by reaching for a camera that was on a shelf. And the flash went off, and you can see this look of total surprise in her face. Well, years later, I'm writing Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules, and the teenagers have a party, right? They have a big party, and they don't want to get caught by Greg's parents. But what do? They accidentally take a picture of themselves having the party when Bill reaches for a camera on a shelf. And so you can see, all those years later, that the picture and the expression is really almost identical between the two pictures. So a lot of the things that happened to me in real life, I've sort of fictionalized and turned into book stories. So it took me 8 years to write my first draft of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It took me quite a long time, but I really took my time with it. I said, I'm going to really do this right. And all that time, I was not thinking about kids. I told you to begin with that I became a children's author on accident. Well, because I thought of comics or comic strips as sort of a general audience's thing, and my father read comic strips, I thought that I was writing Diary of a Wimpy Kid for adults. I thought I was writing stories that would remind adults of what it was like to be kids. And so I found a publisher. I went to New York Comic Con and found a guy who really liked my work. And he, too, thought that I had written a book for grown-ups. And then my publisher called one day and they said, well, we have some news for you. The good news is we're going to publish your books, and it's going to be a series. I was like, great, more than one book? I thought I was going to print one big fat book. And he said, and the other news is that it's going to be for kids. And I was like, whoa. I had never in all that time, in 8 years, thought that I was actually writing for kids. And so when I thought about it, it didn't take long to say, well, you know what, the humor is really kind of clean and there's not real violence or anything like that. And I actually think this could work for kids. And so that's how I went from being a person who wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist into a children's author. So here's the very first cover of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. This was my idea when I was aiming it at grown-ups. And it eventually became this cover. And there's two messages in this cover. There's two hidden messages. One is I use the colors black, white, yellow, and red, which are the colors of the state flag of Maryland, where I grew up. And the other is that the cover is red and that it has gold type up top. And that evokes a book called Catcher in the Rye, which is about a teenager named Holden Caulfield, who is a very flawed character. He criticizes everyone else, but he's really quite imperfect himself. And so I wanted to remind people of that book when we created this cover. So now, the book is published in 40 different languages. It's been very exciting to see the different covers come out from different parts of the world. Here's the Korean version. This is the Greek version. The Hebrew version, which is interesting because it's the only one that I'm aware of in which it's printed from right to left. So English-speaking people would read it backwards, I guess you could say. Here is the Japanese version, which is interesting. It's a totally different design sense in Japan. But there's something different as well about the characters. If you look very closely at the characters, they're just slightly different. And what it is they've got 5 fingers, right? In most cartoons, most comics have only 4 fingers because when you do a cartoon, you're trying to express something in the simplest terms, right? So 4 fingers is sort of enough, 3 fingers and a thumb. And in Japan, there's a cultural stigma against showing people or characters with 4 fingers. Hundreds of years ago, there was a class of people who was looked down upon, and they were called the 4-fingered people. And so to this day, you cannot draw characters or people with 4 fingers in Japan. So they asked if they could add a 5th finger to each character, and we said, of course. Here's the German version, which I really like. The title of the German version is Greg's Tagebuch von Idioten am Singeld. I'm not sure if I got that right, but it means Greg's Journal, I'm Surrounded by Idiots, right? Which I think is a better title than my own title. And I said, well, why can't we just call it Diary of a Wimpy Kid like we do everywhere else? And they said, well, there is no word for wimp in our country. So I thought that was very funny. One of my favorite covers is the Brazilian cover, which is Diário de Banana, right? And I was excited to know what banana meant in Brazil, and they said, it means banana. So don't ask me why they called it that. But the third wheel just came out, my 7th book. I'm very excited about that. How many of you guys have read some of that? Good, a good number, cool. So the third wheel came out, it's chocolate brown. It's kind of different from the other books. It's a little more grown up because Greg is trying to get a date to the Valentine's dance. Do you guys celebrate Valentine's Day here? Yes, good. So Greg is trying to get a date to the dance. So it's just a little bit grown up, and you can see that Greg isn't having such a good time of it. But Greg, in this book, tells his story from the very beginning, from his earliest memories, and he claims to be able to remember everything about his life, even before he was born. So here's Greg when he was at his happiest. He remembers being inside of his mom, swimming around in amniotic fluid in the dark, taking naps whenever he wanted, and just at total peace. You know, he didn't even have to eat. It was great. But then one day he hears these noises coming from the outside, and it's classical music, right? So where is this coming from? He's never heard anything from the outside before. Well, Greg's mother is playing him classical music through these speakers that she puts on her belly, right? And I have to admit, we did this to our kids. You know, in America, for some reason, if you're not like playing classical music for your kids before they're born, you feel like your kids are somehow behind in school already. Don't ask me why. So my wife and I did this, and now my kids hate classical music. So, you know, I think that's why. I wanted to show you actually how a Wimpy Kid picture comes together. I used to use pencil and ink, but I've really changed. Now everything is done digitally. I use a tablet where I draw everything digitally. And here's a rough version of a scene, a family restaurant scene that's in the third wheel. I start with different colors to really keep the characters separate from one another. And you can see then I start to ink it. I use a black line to kind of ink it. And then I eventually finish the drawing and remove the pencil lines, if you will, to get the finished product. And so a picture like this one that's really busy might take me 2 or 3 hours to do. Most pictures in the Wimpy Kid series take me about an hour to do. But now I'm going to show you, I'm going to try a little experiment here. I drew a picture yesterday in honor of being in the UK, and I actually recorded it on the screen. So I'm going to show you a picture come to life. And what we're going to do here is we're going to speed it up by about 8 times, so you don't have to sit there and wait a full hour or however long it took me to do this drawing. So I start with head templates, right, to make sure the characters are just right, because I use so few lines that if you get something just a little bit wrong, the characters won't look right. So I always start with the same head shapes. And you can see here I'm drawing Rowley, and we'll see if you guys can guess. Just think to yourself, what am I actually drawing here? I'm starting with really rough pencils because I don't need them to be perfect, right? So we've got Greg's tongue there, Rowley's beads of sweat. He's really nervous. So this is Greg playing the tourist, right, at Buckingham Palace. And Rowley is a guard, one of the Queen's guards. So Greg is trying to make him laugh. And what you can see is that I make lots and lots and lots of mistakes as I draw. But the great thing about working digitally is that I can make all the mistakes I want, and then I just press a button, and it undoes it. And my tablet that I draw on has about maybe 16 buttons on it. And by the time I'm finished with a book, this tablet has almost become a part of my body because I'm so used to flying around and zooming in and out. And you can see the way that I draw. I'm scrolling around and zooming in and out and correcting things. And that's what I do with the tablet. What happened was I used to work in pencil and ink all the time. But what would happen is I'd draw my drawings, and I wasn't a very good inker. My ink lines would get all over the place. And then I'd scan into the computer, and I'd try to fix the drawings, and it would take forever. So a doodle that should have taken me just about 15 minutes to a half an hour would sometimes take 2 hours or more because of all the corrections that I had to make. But you can see here I can really do it on the fly. So the picture has almost come to life. Let's advance this so we see the final little marks here. So I'm making the last moves and getting everything just right. And then I never really used color in Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but here I felt like it would be a good idea. So there's Greg trying to make Rowley laugh, and it's an image I thought that you might enjoy. So let's go to the next slide here. I've gotten to do a number of really special things being an author. I've only been an author for about 5 years, an author of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. But I've gotten to do lots of crazy things, and I would count this as one of them. Speaking to 80,000 kids out there on the internet and you guys here is a real privilege. One of the things I got to do that was very cool was I got to speak at the White House in America, in our nation's capital, where the president lives. So I got to go there for the Easter egg roll, and I got to go with my family and meet Barack Obama and his family. And we have the same dog, so that was cool. And his daughters, Barack Obama's daughters, are fans of my books. But I got to read on the White House lawn to a crowd. And I said to my 2 sons, Will and Grant, who are 7 and 10, I said, you guys can sit next to me as long as you behave yourselves. You don't do anything that embarrasses me, right? Have your parents ever said that? And so they promised, and they sat next to me, and I have to say they were mildly well-behaved. They kneeled on the chairs and rocked the chairs and got down on the ground and all sorts of other things. But still, for them, they were pretty good. And then what happened was I was really proud of them afterwards. I said, you guys did a really good job. You didn't embarrass me. And I think I bought them each a toy or something like that when we got home. And so when we got home, actually, I watched the video playback on the White House's website. And at about the 11-minute mark, I had my younger son, Grant, read out of my lap, right? And so this is Grant, then age 6, I think. He was reading from my lap. He was very proud that he could read my book. And I saw a parent or a teacher who knows what's about to happen. You can almost see the glint in my older son's eye, right? So on the White House official website, my older son is spanking my younger son for all the world to see. So you never really can control kids, but that's what makes the world funny, right? But I've gotten to do a lot of other things too. I think one of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do is I got to make a giant helium balloon of Greg Heffley. In America, they have something called the Macy's Day Parade or the Thanksgiving Day Parade, where these giant helium balloons of famous cartoon characters float down the streets of New York City. And so I got the special honor of creating one of these balloons, and it started off with a rough sketch. So here's Greg. My idea was that if Greg was flying in November, it's kind of cold, he'd be scared, he'd be scared up in the air. So he's clutching his diary to him like a security blanket. And he's sort of wrapped around it. And so that turned into a clay model. And this is myself and my editor, Charlie Kochman, working on the Greg Heffley model with the sculptor who's off screen. And we wanted to get everything just right because the balloon was so big, it was twice as long as this room. It was just a huge, huge balloon. And so this is myself and my brothers getting ready to walk the balloon. And this was last year, but I walked it again just the other day this year. So this is us with this huge helium balloon, and we're all on the ground. It took about 50 people on the ground in 2 trucks to keep the balloon tethered to the ground. And this is myself and my older brother, Scott, and my younger brother, Patrick, and we're wearing cheese bibs. I know we look very cool. And finally, Greg got to fly in the parade. And I wanted to kind of end with this slide of Greg. He's flying through the streets of New York City, and the Empire State Building is in the background. So I did get that dream of being with these other cartoon characters like Bart Simpson and Garfield. So what I wanted to say is that, as I've said, I'm not an especially talented writer, nor am I an especially talented illustrator, but I did have an idea, and I really stuck with it. So I wanted to encourage you kids here and watching on the web that if you have an idea that you believe in, that you think is a good idea, to develop it and to nurture it and to stick with it, because maybe one day your ideas will have a chance to fly. Thank you very much. I think we're going to do questions.
Yeah, nice one. Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. That was fantastic. Now, before we go to the questions, when you guys registered online, we asked you to send in your funniest moments, and we've chosen a few of our favorites. And Jeff, are you ready to read a few of these?
I'm ready.
Good stuff. Okay.
Is this?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, my earpiece fell out. Yasmin from Marlboro Science Academy said, "I put salt, pepper, and mustard in my dad's cake."
Nice.
That's not very nice.
That sounds mean. That's mean.
Jamie from Spaldwick Junior School said, "When I was 3, I accidentally ate my dog's food." Bad.
Barking.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, Joseph from Peter and Paul School in Cramlington in Northumberland said, "I ran straight into a tree in a foot race." Horrible. But they all live.
Yeah, they're lucky.
So
they're lucky.
They live to tell the tale.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing those with us.
Sure.
Well, so time to answer some of the questions that we've had in. We've had some great ones through. I'll start with a few that we've had online first, I think, Jeff. So this is from the whole of Class 6F at St. Joseph's Junior School. And they wanted to know, when you were growing up, were you anything like the character of Greg?
I was a lot like Greg, unfortunately. I didn't have 3 little hairs growing out of the top of my head, but I was a lot like Greg. I didn't always do the exact right thing. I had some things I did that I was kind of embarrassed about, or I am embarrassed about now, but I was a good kid too. I was sort of like an average kid who had wimpy moments.
Okay. Brilliant. Now, we've got Ryan Stanley here from the Manor Academy. Now, he wanted to know, obviously all the books are different colors, and which was your favorite color?
I think my favorite color was red. The first book is red.
Yeah.
And before I got that red book in the mail, I was not a published author. And when you become a published author, it's very, very exciting because it means that somebody else thought that you did a good enough job of writing that they paid to have your work printed. And so it was really cool. I remember when I opened up that package, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. So the red one will always be very special to me.
Brilliant. Now, I think we've got a few people in the audience who've got some questions for you as well, Jeff. So should we maybe go with the first one as we pass the mic down?
My name is Jasmine, and I would like to know what gave you the idea of writing cartoons?
Well, my father introduced me to comics and cartoons. He had a drawer full of comics, Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck comics and Little Lulu comics that I loved. And he always made sure that when we came downstairs in the morning, that the comics page was open in the newspaper. And so I think that really helped foster a love of comics. So I credit him for that.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I'd like to know what you felt like when your books were published.
Well, it felt wonderful. As I just mentioned, it was like the best experience of my life. But when the books came out, it was funny. I thought, wow, now my books are published, I'm going to be this big success. Well, it wasn't true. I went to book signings, and on average, I would say a half of one person showed up to my book signings. So I went all over the country, the United States, for a year, and really nobody showed up at all. And it was very humbling and embarrassing, but I'm glad I had that experience.
Okay, I've got a good one here, slightly a bit of off-piste. Now, this is from Macy from St. Michael's Primary School, and she was asking, if you had a superpower, which superpower would it be?
Well, I have this recurring dream that I can fly, right? And it's very wonderful, except for that I can only fly this high, and I fly like I'm swimming, so I'm moving through the air really slowly, and everybody's like saying it looks really lame, and it's not really a superpower. It doesn't really count, you know. So I think I'll go with invisibility and get away from the flying.
It sounds like a safer bet.
Right.
And also, I've got one from Daniel here from Crossgates Primary School. Now, he wanted to know, why was Fregley so disgusting?
Why is Fregley so disgusting? Interesting. Well, I think everybody, you know, who lives in a neighborhood has a kid like Fregley who's just a little bit different. And I created this character, Fregley, out of my imagination. He's actually not based on a real person. But I think everybody knows a person like Fregley. And so I wanted to bring that kind of character to life.
Yeah. We'll go hand over to the audience again. Where are we? Somewhere at the back. Hey.
My name is William, and I would like to know, what is your favourite book and why?
I think I like the looks of the first one the best, but I like the third wheel the best right now. I feel like I'm getting a little bit better at writing as I go along, and the third wheel is kind of the best story, so I'm proud of that one.
Oh, great. Go for it.
Hi, my name's Ruby, and I would like to know if it's best to plan a book or just go straight on to writing.
Actually, your name is Ruby. I have a character in my new book called Ruby Bird, who bites a teacher, so I'm very sorry about that. But what I do is I write really very differently than other writers. What I do is I collect jokes. So my first step is to write 350 jokes. Once I've written 350 jokes, then I can move into my planning. So most writers plan out the plot and then they fill it in. Well, I sort of fill it in and then plan out the plot. So I do things really differently. And that's why my books don't have really a nice, neat narrative. The story isn't the strongest part. The jokes are the best part. That's why.
Brilliant. Oh, I've got a few more from the World Wide Web here. Now, we've got one from Ella from Shipley. And she was asking, if you could swap your job, would you swap it for, what would you swap it for?
Oh, that's an interesting question. What I didn't mention here is that I do have a job. I have a day job, and I work for Pearson, actually, which owns Puffin and Penguin. And it is, I'm the creative director of a website called Poptropica, which is a big virtual world for kids. And it's a really neat experience. And it came out in the same year that Diary of a Wimpy Kid came out. So I've had those two things going. And so I would actually swap for that. I'm very happy in my day job.
Okay, so now I've got Kieran here who wants to know, when working on the films for the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, who was the funniest person to work with backstage?
Oh, that's a good question. Who was the funniest person to work with backstage? I'm going to go with either Zach Gordon or Robert Capron. They were both very funny in their own way. They were the Greg and the Rowley Greg, Zach, was a big prankster, and Rowley, or Robert, I can't tell them apart nowadays, he was very gullible, at least at first, so he always fell for pranks, so it was a really good combination. They were funny in their own way.
Well, I think we've got time still for a few more questions,
Great.
so we'll go back to the audience.
Hi, my name is Fahim, and I would like to know, who did you dedicate the book, The Third Wheel, to?
The Third Wheel is dedicated to my grandmother who passed away, and that's very sad. But I wanted to do that for my family. But I've also dedicated a lot of the books to kids who are sick, who I know are sick and need a little bit of a boost. So I've written or dedicated the last few books to kids who are sick.
Wow. And we've got one more at there.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Raz, and I'd like to know, what does it feel like to be an author?
It feels great. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to be in front of an audience and in front of cameras at the moment. But what I really like about being an author is that you sort of get to be famous, but not really. Like, nobody knows, I can go out into the world, nobody ever knows who I am, nobody recognizes me, and so I can really have a normal life. But then my books get in front of a lot of people, so people know my work instead of me, which is a lot of fun. It's very rewarding.
Okay, I'm going to flip back to online questions.
Okay.
We've got loads of them flooding in. So we've got Mary from Featherby Juniors, and she wanted to know how it felt when you won the Blue Peter Book of the Year awards.
I felt I won Best Book of the past decade. I felt very undeserving. That's the word I would use. I think that Harry Potter, that series, those are the best book of the past decade, or maybe 20, 50 years. I'm not sure. But J.K. Rowling is an incredible storyteller. So I felt like I really got kind of lucky that my books were published more recently, so I won that vote. But I thank the voters at Blue Peter. That was very, very exciting, a huge honor.
Yeah. Right, the whole of Class 5 at St. Thomas's, they want to know what your favorite ice cream flavor is.
My
Very
favorite
important.
ice cream flavor, I'm going to go with mint chocolate chip, but the white kind, not the green kind.
Okay. We've got some top tips here as well from Ben Richards from Hornsey. He's going to give you some suggestions for future books. He would say, would you consider using the title Disaster Strikes for a next Wimpy Kid book?
That's a good title. I like that. But he'd probably sue me if I went and used that title.
Or he's gonna cut.
I like the title Big Trouble, too. I like that. Just when you're in big trouble, that's like the worst thing as a kid. And you always think you're going to jail,
Well, maybe if you use
Yeah,
it.
maybe.
Now, I think we've got two more still in the audience, haven't we?
After you wrote hello, my name is Maxwell, and I would like to know, after you wrote your first book, what gave you the idea to do more? Who's your favourite character in Diary of the Wimpy Kid?
Oh, okay. Well, what gave me the idea to do more books? I was like, oh, you guys like that? Well, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. I'm going to keep writing these books until kids get tired of reading them, or if I can't come up with any more ideas. But my favorite character in the books is Rowley Jefferson. Rowley is Greg's best friend, but what I really like about Rowley is that he likes being a kid, and he's not afraid to be a kid. I think with most kids, you kind of want to grow up quickly, and you want to be at the next age level, but Rowley likes being a kid, and so that's why I really like him. I think he's refreshing.
Yeah. Have we got one more?
My name's Mia, and I would like to know, are your stories based on yourself?
A lot of the stories in Diary of a Wimpy Kid are based on a sort of truth. If my family read my stories, they would always be able to say, oh, I know where you got that idea and that one and that one. But I put in a lot of fiction and then put it in the blender, and out comes Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Nice. Now, back online again. Now, we've got a question from the Quake School Library. They want to know what your school report was like when you were about 13 years old.
And you mean report card, what they
Report
would call a
card,
report
yeah.
card
Well,
in the
yeah.
US. School report. I was like, what does that mean?
School report, yeah.
I was actually a very good student up until college. And I was a good student. I was a top student. And then when I got to college, things fell off, because what I was doing was I was spending all my time working on my Wimpy Kid book. I mean, not my Wimpy Kid books, but my Doof cartoons. And so I spent too much time doing that, and I sort of fell off a cliff there. So I did graduate.
Good work, Chris.
Thanks.
And James Howden from Grimsdyke Primary School. Why did you base your latest story on Valentine's Day?
I thought that Valentine's Day was a really good moment for Greg, because there are a lot of pressures that come with being a kid, and then all of a sudden there's this dance at his school, and now he's got to get a date. It's something that I think is kids, when they get older, they have to experience that sort of a thing. But I thought it would be fun to put that into Greg's world and really make him feel the stress of getting a date for the Valentine's Day dance.
Okay. Now, one of my favorites is the Cheese Touch, and Mrs. Henderson from Lowport Primary School wants to know when you thought of it.
I thought of the Cheese Touch right when I started writing the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. There was actually a piece of cheese on the playground in my church parking lot, and kids just stayed away from it. Instead of just picking up and throwing it aside, they actually stayed away from it, like there was a ring that kids wouldn't enter. And so I thought it would be funny if somebody touched it and then passed it on. Do they have cooties in the UK? Not really, sort of.
Similar, but
yeah.
yeah.
In the U.S., grade school kids, they pass on something like the Cheese Touch to one another, but you can't get it if you cross your fingers. So Cheese Touch is a much worse version of that.
So crossing the fingers doesn't help?
It does, actually.
Oh, don't tell anyone. Now, Lauren from Lincoln Christ Hospital School, she wants to know where your ideal environment is to do your writing.
My ideal environment is also my worst environment. It is on the couch with a blanket over my head so that I block out all the sights and sounds around me, but maybe 80% of the time I fall asleep. So my wife will find me on the couch, asleep with a blanket on my head and say, "What are you doing?" And I'll say, "I'm working." And it doesn't really fly.
My goodness, right. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Yeah, put your hands up. If you do, we'll pass the mic out. Whilst we're getting a mic out to you, I've got another one for you here. Well, actually, all of P6 and P5 in the Dumfries, Scotland School, Brownhall School, would want you just to give a big wave and shout out and say hello.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for watching.
And
They're cheering there, right?
Oh yeah, they're going crazy. They're going crazy. Do we have a question down here? Oh, fantastic. No. Too shy.
The microphone is like the cheese. Nobody wants to touch it.
I know, exactly. You told it was the Cheese Touch, that's why. Well, whilst we're waiting for another question to come through, we've got Ellis from... Oh, no, did I ask you about your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book as a kid?
Yeah, as a kid's book.
I think my all-time favorite book as a kid was The Hobbit. I read it in about the 5th grade, and I really loved that book. And of course, it's coming out in movie form in just a few days.
My goodness. How are we doing? One more in there, down there?
My name is the same as the one who was here a minute ago. My name's called Mia Frances Durham, so you don't get mixed up. Where do you go to get all your ideas?
I go to my couch sometimes, but I've tried everything. I don't know where to get my ideas from. A lot of my ideas, I know that the next book is in my head. I just don't know how to get it out of my head. So I try all sorts of different things. I try walking. I try running. Nothing really seems to work.
I think we've got one more from an online here for her. I've got Mr. Beasler from Highfield School. Now, if you could relive one moment in your life again, what would it be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think that if I had to watch my life back, like if you go to heaven and you have to watch your whole life back again, I would skip over the part where I was wrapped in toilet paper. It's not my proudest moment. So there it is.
Fair enough, fair enough. Now, do we have any more questions coming from the audience? Okay. Oh, no, I'm afraid that's actually all we've got time for since we've got no questions immediately. But I want to say thanks, Jeff, and thanks for all the fantastic questions. I hope you've enjoyed hearing Jeff's responses to them all. And, well, it's from me to thank you all from Puffin Virtually Live. I hope you'll be able to join us again for our next broadcast. Jeff, I'm sure you'd like to say thank you before we go to everyone.
Yes, thank you to everyone who tuned in today to watch. And thank you to everyone who came out here today. This has been a real special honor for me. And thank you, Alistair. You did a great job.
Well, thanks. Pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone.